Out of the car. Hands where I can see them.
I'm out. My name's Elijah Brandon. I'm not resisting.
On your knees. Do it now.
Knees down. Hands up. I'm Elijah Brandon, 32. Lives off McKenna. You got badge 1289.
Turn around. Keep those hands spread. Don't move.
I'm not moving. I'll speak.
Cuffs going on. Stay still.
Still, you hear me? Elijah Brandon.
This reconstruction documents a police misconduct incident based on procedural standards, body camera footage, and witness accounts from similar cases. Names and specific locations have been altered to protect privacy. On August 12, 2025, at approximately 11:42 p.m., Officer Daniel Mercer of the Lakeside Police Department made a decision that would end his 14-year career in law enforcement. The dashcam footage shows his patrol car making a sudden U-turn on Elmwood Avenue to follow a silver Honda Civic driven by 32-year-old Elijah Brandon. What happened in the next 17 minutes would trigger a federal civil rights investigation, lead to criminal charges against Officer Mercer, and ultimately result in a $3.2 million settlement paid by the city of Lakeside. If you're watching this video in Lakeside, you might recognize the intersection of Elmwood and 4th Street where this incident began. This is where Officer Mercer, with no probable cause documented in his report, activated his lights and initiated the traffic stop that would destroy his career, his marriage, and ultimately his freedom. If you believe in police accountability, subscribe now as we examine exactly how a decorated officer with 14 years of service threw everything away in a single night of inexcusable misconduct. The body camera footage shows Officer Mercer approaching Brandon's vehicle with his hand already on his weapon, a violation of department policy for routine traffic stops. According to internal affairs records obtained through public records requests, this wasn't the first time Mercer had been flagged for aggressive behavior. In fact, he had accumulated 7 civilian complaints over the previous 3 years, though none had resulted in disciplinary action. Officer Mercer displayed a pattern of escalation during routine encounters, stated Lieutenant Sarah Donovan in her internal affairs interview. We had counseled him informally about his approach to traffic stops, but nothing in his file rose to the level requiring formal intervention. That lack of intervention would cost the department dearly. As Mercer approached the vehicle, multiple cameras were recording: his body camera, the patrol car dash cam, and, unknown to him at the time, Elijah Brandon's phone, which he had propped against his dashboard as soon as he saw the police lights behind him. The security camera from the 24-hour gas station across the street also captured portions of the encounter, providing a fourth angle that would later prove crucial in the investigation. I immediately felt something was wrong, Brandon later testified. The officer seemed agitated before he even spoke to me. That's why I started recording. The body camera footage shows Mercer demanding Brandon license and registration, but then immediately ordering him not to move when Brandon reached toward the glove compartment. This contradictory command, ask for documents but forbid movement to retrieve them, is a tactic that has been documented in numerous cases of police misconduct. What Officer Mercer didn't know as he escalated the situation was that Elijah Brandon wasn't just any community member. Brandon served on the Civilian Police Oversight Committee and had recently completed a ride-along program with the Lakeside Police Department as part of his community outreach work. More critically, what happened next would trigger automatic federal jurisdiction and set in motion a series of events that would leave Officer Mercer facing years in prison. The footage clearly shows Brandon remaining calm, identifying himself by name, and asking repeatedly for the reason he was pulled over, a question Mercer never answers throughout the entire encounter. Instead, frame-by-frame analysis shows Mercer becoming increasingly agitated by Brandon's composed demeanor. At the 3:24 mark in the body camera footage, Mercer can be seen unholstering his taser while ordering Brandon out of the vehicle. What happens in the next 90 seconds will shock you. As Brandon slowly complies with the order to exit his vehicle, keeping his hands visible at all times, Officer Mercer suddenly grabs him by the collar and throws him against the car. The impact is so violent that the side mirror breaks off, falling to the pavement. He just snapped, said Tamika Johnson, who witnessed the incident from the gas station across the street. The man wasn't resisting at all. The officer just lost it completely. The body camera continues recording as Mercer forces Brandon to the ground, pressing his knee into Brandon's back while applying handcuffs. Brandon can be heard repeatedly asking why he's being detained and informing Mercer that he's in pain. "I can't breathe properly," Brandon says on the recording. "You're hurting me. Please loosen the cuffs." Instead of addressing these concerns, Mercer can be heard saying, "Should have thought about that before you decided to give me attitude." This statement would later become central to the prosecution's case, as it demonstrated that Mercer was punishing Brandon not for any legal violation, but for what he perceived as disrespect, a clear violation of constitutional rights. But the true turning point, the moment that sealed Officer Mercer's fate, was still to come. With Brandon handcuffed and clearly not resisting, multiple camera angles show Mercer doing something that violated not just department policy, but federal law. Something so egregious that when the footage was reviewed the next morning, Mercer was immediately placed on administrative leave. What do you think should happen to officers who abuse their power this way? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. As we continue this investigation, you'll see exactly how Officer Mercer's actions that night triggered an unstoppable cascade of consequences, from immediate suspension to criminal charges to the destruction of his personal life. And you'll learn what Mercer didn't know about Elijah Brandon. Information that would have made any reasonable officer think twice before engaging in misconduct. In the next segment, we'll reveal the shocking discovery made when investigators searched Mercer's patrol car and personal devices. Evidence that suggested this wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, but part of a disturbing pattern that had gone undetected for years. As the sun rose over Lakeside the morning after Officer Mercer's encounter with Elijah Brandon, the wheels of accountability were already turning. By 8:17 a.m. on August 13th, 2025, all 4 video recordings of the incident had been uploaded to the department's evidence management system, and by 9:30 a.m., Chief of Police Raymond Wilson had viewed them in their entirety. "I've been in law enforcement for 27 years, Chief Wilson stated in his official deposition. "What I witnessed on that footage was among the most disturbing abuses of power I've seen from one of my officers. I immediately contacted Internal Affairs and the District Attorney's Office. What had horrified Chief Wilson and would soon shock the entire community was captured in crystal clarity at the 4:37 mark of Officer Mercer's body camera footage. With Elijah Brandon already handcuffed, compliant, and secured on the ground, Mercer can be seen removing a small plastic bag from his own pocket, momentarily turning his body away from his patrol car's dashboard camera, and then announcing, well, what do we have here?" as he pretended to find the bag near Brandon. "He planted evidence on me," Brandon testified. "I'll watch him do it. He took something from his own pocket and then claimed he found drugs on me. I don't use drugs. I've never used drugs. I work with children at the community center." The planted evidence alone would have been enough to end Mercer's career, but what investigators discovered as they dug deeper revealed a pattern of misconduct that had somehow escaped detection for years. Officer Mercer's personnel file contained 7 civilian complaints in the past 3 years, stated Internal Affairs Captain Julia Reyes. While none individually rose to the level of formal discipline, collectively they painted a disturbing picture of an officer who routinely escalated encounters with certain types of civilians. Those certain types became immediately apparent when investigators analyzed Mercer's traffic stop history. Data from the department's own record showed that Mercer pulled over black male drivers at a rate 4.7 times higher than his colleagues patrolling the same areas. Even more damning, his search rate for these drivers was 6.2 times higher than department average, while his contraband discovery rate was actually below average. The statistics tell a clear story, testified Dr. James Bradley, a criminal justice professor who analyzed the data for the investigation. Officer Mercer was targeting black male drivers, searching them without adequate cause, and finding less contraband than officers who followed proper procedures. This suggests a pattern of biased policing that should have triggered intervention long before the Brandon incident. But why would a 14-year veteran with commendations risk everything by planting evidence during a routine traffic stop? The answer emerged as investigators examined Mercer's personal circumstances in the months leading up to the incident. Court records revealed that Mercer was in the middle of a bitter divorce, facing substantial debt, and had recently been passed over for promotion to sergeant for the 3rd time. His ex-wife, Stephanie Mercer, provided a written statement to investigators. Daniel became increasingly bitter about his job over the past year. He felt the department was promoting diversity hires over experienced officers like himself. His exact words were, "They're giving badges to people who have no business wearing them." His drinking increased, and his views became more extreme. Text messages recovered from Mercer's personal phone showed exchanges with fellow officers that contained racist language and derogatory comments about the department's diversity initiatives. In one message sent just 3 days before the Brandon incident, Mercer wrote, "These community oversight committees are a joke. Bunch of civilians who've never worn the badge telling us how to do our jobs." What Mercer couldn't have known was that Elijah Brandon wasn't just any member of the Civilian Police Oversight Committee. Brandon had completed the department's Citizen Police Academy, participated in ride-alongs, and was respected by many officers for his balanced approach to police community relations. Elijah was always fair, Lieutenant James Rodriguez stated in his interview. He supported good policing while pushing for accountability. He wasn't anti-police by any means. He just wanted the department to serve everyone equally. The body camera footage continues after Mercer's evidence planting, showing him roughly pulling Brandon to his feet and conducting an illegal search of his wallet. It's at this moment that Mercer discovers Brandon's identification card for the Civilian Police Oversight Committee. The camera captures Mercer's momentary freeze, the first indication that he realizes he may have made a catastrophic error. But instead of backing down, Mercer doubles down. "I don't care who you think you are," Mercer says on the recording. "You had drugs on you, and now you're going to jail." Brandon remains remarkably composed, responding, "Officer Mercer, we both know those aren't my drugs. Your body camera recorded you planting them. This stop was illegal from the beginning, and now you're compounding your mistakes." This statement, calm, informed, and accurate, appears to further enrage Mercer. What happens next crosses the line from misconduct to criminal assault. The gas station security camera, which had the clearest view of the scene, shows Mercer shoving Brandon against the patrol car with excessive force. Brandon's head impacts the roof of the vehicle, causing a laceration that would later require 7 stitches. Blood can be seen immediately running down Brandon's face. "At that point, I feared for my life," Brandon later testified. "I was handcuffed, bleeding, and in the custody of an officer who had already broken multiple laws. I didn't know if I would make it to the police station alive." What do you think should happen to officers who plant evidence and use excessive force? Should their supervisors also be held accountable for missing warning signs? Share your thoughts in the comments. As Mercer placed the bleeding Brandon in the back of his patrol car, he was unaware that a bystander at the gas station had already called 911 to report police brutality. The dispatcher's log, obtained through public records requests, shows the call came in at 11:58 p.m., just as Mercer was preparing to transport Brandon to the station. "I'm watching a police officer assault a handcuffed black man at the Elmwood Quick Stop," the caller reported. "The man is bleeding from his head and wasn't resisting at all. Someone needs to get here now before this officer kills him." This 911 call set in motion a sequence of events that would rapidly escalate the situation beyond Mercer's control. Dispatch, following recently implemented protocols for civilian reports of officer misconduct, immediately notified the watch commander, Lieutenant Sarah Donovan. "When I received the call about a possible excessive force incident, I immediately dispatched 2 additional units to the scene," Donovan testified. "Our policy requires supervisor response to any allegation of this nature, so I also responded personally." The arrival of Lieutenant Donovan and 2 additional patrol units at 12:07 a.m. on August 13, 2025, marked the beginning of the end for Officer Mercer's career. What happened next would reveal the most shocking aspect of the case, one that would transform a serious but local police misconduct incident into a federal civil rights investigation. As Lieutenant Donovan reviewed the situation, she made a critical discovery that would change everything. But before we reveal what she found, let's examine what was happening inside Mercer's patrol car during those crucial minutes. The patrol car's internal camera shows Brandon, still bleeding from his head wound, calmly speaking to Mercer from the back seat. "Officer, I want you to know that I understand the pressures you're under," Brandon says on the recording. "But what you've done tonight isn't just going to affect me. It's going to destroy your career. There's still time to change course." Mercer's response, captured clearly on the audio, would later be played repeatedly during his criminal trial. "You people always think you know everything. By the time anyone reviews this footage, I'll have already logged the drugs into evidence. It'll be your word against mine, and we both know whose word counts more." This statement, admitting consciousness of guilt and intent to falsify evidence, would become the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. But Mercer had made a critical miscalculation, one that would soon be revealed as Lieutenant Donovan arrived on scene. Lieutenant Sarah Donovan's arrival at 12:07 a.m. on August 13, 2025, marked the moment when Officer Daniel Mercer's carefully constructed narrative began to unravel. As she approached the patrol car, her body camera captured Mercer's visible surprise. He hadn't expected a supervisor to appear at the scene of what he'd called in as a routine drug arrest. "Officer Mercer, step away from the vehicle," Lieutenant Donovan orders on the recording. "I need to speak with your suspect." "Lieutenant, I've got this under control," Mercer responds, his voice tense. "Subject had drugs in his possession. I was just about to transport him for booking." The footage shows Lieutenant Donovan looking past Mercer into the patrol car's back seat, where she sees Elijah Brandon, handcuffed and bleeding from his head wound. "Is that Elijah Brandon?" she asks, recognition dawning on her face. This moment, captured simultaneously on Donovan's body camera, the patrol car's internal camera, and the gas station security footage, was the transformation point that changed everything. What Officer Mercer didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Lieutenant Donovan and Elijah Brandon had worked together just 2 weeks earlier on a community policing initiative. As a respected member of the Civilian Police Oversight Committee, Brandon had collaborated with department leadership on revising use of force policies, the very policies Mercer had just flagrantly violated. "When I recognized Mr. Brandon in the back of that patrol car, bleeding and handcuffed, I knew immediately something had gone terribly wrong," Lieutenant Donovan testified. "This wasn't some random drug suspect. This was someone known to our department as a community leader with an impeccable reputation." The patrol car's internal camera captures the critical exchange that followed. "Mr. Brandon, are you all right?" Donovan asks, opening the rear door. "Lieutenant Donovan," Brandon responds, his voice steady despite his injury. "I'm glad you're here. Officer Mercer pulled me over without cause, assaulted me while I was compliant, and planted drugs on me. It's all on his body camera." The footage shows Mercer's face draining of color as he realizes the depth of his miscalculation. Not only did Brandon know Lieutenant Donovan by name, but he was directly alleging evidence planting, the most serious form of police misconduct. "That's a lie," Mercer interjects. "He had a bag of cocaine on him. I found it during the search." Lieutenant Donovan's response was by the book. "We'll review the body camera footage. Right now, I'm calling for medical assistance for Mr. Brandon." What happened next revealed the full extent of Mercer's desperate situation. As Lieutenant Donovan radioed for an ambulance, she instructed one of the responding officers, Sergeant James Wilson, to secure Mercer's body camera as evidence. Standard procedure is to allow officers to upload their own footage at the end of shift, Sergeant Wilson later explained. But in cases of serious misconduct allegations, supervisors are authorized to immediately secure recording devices to prevent tampering. When Sergeant Wilson approached Mercer to retrieve the body camera, Mercer's hand moved to the device's power button, a movement clearly captured on Lieutenant Donovan's still recording camera. "Officer Mercer, do not touch that camera," Donovan commands sharply. "Hands away from your equipment now." This attempt to potentially delete evidence would later be cited in the criminal charges against Mercer as consciousness of guilt. But the most damning revelation was still to come. As medical personnel arrived to treat Brandon's head wound, Lieutenant Donovan instructed Sergeant Wilson to secure the alleged drugs that Mercer claimed to have found. This standard evidence preservation procedure led to an unexpected discovery. When I asked Officer Mercer for the narcotics evidence, Sergeant Wilson testified he reached into his right pocket and produced a small plastic bag containing white powder. I immediately noticed there was no evidence tag, no documentation, and he hadn't followed any of our evidence handling protocols. Even more concerning, when Sergeant Wilson examined Mercer's patrol log and radio communications, he discovered that Mercer had never called in the traffic stop. Department policy required officers to notify dispatch of all civilian encounters, providing location and license plate information, a policy Mercer had followed consistently throughout his career until this night. The only logical conclusion, the district attorney would later argue in court, was that Officer Mercer never intended for this encounter to be officially documented. He deliberately avoided calling in the stop because he planned from the beginning to plant evidence on Mr. Brandon. As paramedics treated Brandon in the ambulance, he made a statement that would further transform the case. "I need to inform you that I'm a federal contractor with security clearance," Brandon told Lieutenant Donovan, as recorded on her body camera. "I work with the Department of Justice on community policing grants. That's why I serve on the Oversight Committee." And now that mistake is costing him everything. This single revelation elevated the case from serious departmental misconduct to a potential federal civil rights violation. Interfering with a federal contractor through false arrest and fabricated evidence automatically triggered Department of Justice jurisdiction. By 1:30 a.m. on August 13th, 2025, just 2 hours after the initial traffic stop, Chief Wilson had been notified of the incident. By 2:15 a.m., Officer Mercer was placed on administrative leave and his service weapon, badge, and department credentials were confiscated. By 8 a.m., the FBI had been notified and had opened a preliminary investigation. The speed with which this escalated was unprecedented, said Police Union Representative Michael Garza. Usually these investigations take weeks or months, but within hours, Mercer was effectively done as a police officer. The transformation from routine traffic stop to career-ending federal case happened because of a series of fatal miscalculations by Officer Mercer. He chose to target someone who knew proper police procedures. He failed to realize his victim had connections within the department. He didn't know Brandon, federal contractor status. He was unaware of the multiple camera angles recording his actions. He underestimated how quickly evidence of his misconduct would be reviewed. As Brandon received medical treatment for his head wound, requiring 7 stitches at Lakeside Memorial Hospital, the evidence against Mercer continued to mount. The preliminary drug field test performed on the substance Mercer claimed to have found came back negative for cocaine or any controlled substance. The white powder was analyzed by our lab, testified forensic scientist Dr. Cassandra Hawkins. It was determined to be common baking soda. This is significant because baking soda is often used by officers who plant evidence specifically because it resembles cocaine but isn't actually illegal to possess. Even more damning, when investigators executed a search warrant on Mercer's locker and personal vehicle the following day, August 14th, 2025, they discovered multiple small plastic bags containing baking soda, identical to the one he had planted on Brandon. "In my 20 years investigating police misconduct," stated FBI Special Agent Thomas Rodriguez, "I've never seen a more clear-cut case of evidence planting. The officer had the materials, the opportunity, and we have video of him actually doing it." As news of the incident spread through the department and the community, other victims began to come forward. 3 former arrestees, all black men who had been pulled over by Mercer in the previous year, described similar experiences: traffic stops without clear cause, aggressive behavior, and drugs allegedly found during searches. "I lost my job because of those false charges," said James Bradley, who had been arrested by Mercer 8 months earlier. "I kept telling everyone that those were my drugs, but nobody believed me. It was my word against the police officers." The department began reviewing all of Mercer's drug arrests from the previous 3 years, a total of 64 cases. The findings were disturbing. Black drivers represented 72% of Mercer's drug arrests, despite making up only 14% of Lakeside's population. "The statistical pattern is impossible to explain through random chance," testified Dr. Elaine Harper, a criminologist who analyzed the data. "The racial disparity in Officer Mercer's enforcement actions indicates a clear pattern of targeted harassment." By the end of the first week following the incident, Officer Mercer's 14-year career was effectively over. But the consequences were just beginning. The district attorney's office announced they would be reviewing all of Mercer's previous arrests for potential misconduct, meaning dozens of convictions could be overturned. The financial implications for the city were staggering. Not only was Brandon filing a civil rights lawsuit seeking $3.2 million in damages, but each of the potentially wrongful convictions represented additional liability. "The city is looking at potential damages in the tens of millions," stated City Attorney Jennifer Martinez in a confidential memo later made public through records requests. Officer Mercer's actions have created a legal and financial liability that will impact our budget for years to come. As the investigation expanded, the most shocking revelation was yet to come, one that would transform Mercer from a disgraced officer to a criminal defendant facing years in federal prison. 3 days after the incident, as Elijah Brandon was recovering from his injuries, the FBI executed search warrants on Officer Daniel Mercer's home, personal vehicles, and electronic devices. What they discovered transformed the case from a single incident of misconduct into something far more disturbing. During the execution of federal search warrants on August 15, 2025, agents discovered a personal journal maintained by Officer Mercer. FBI Special Agent Catherine Morales testified. The contents revealed a systematic pattern of targeting minority drivers with the explicit intent to fabricate charges. The journal, which Mercer had maintained for over 2 years, contained entries documenting his traffic stops, complete with racial descriptions of drivers and disturbing comments about his intentions. One entry, dated just 3 weeks before the Brandon incident, read, "Pulled over another one tonight. These people don't belong in Lakeside. If the system won't keep them out, I will. Made sure he won't be coming back to this neighborhood anytime soon." The journal entries constitute overwhelming evidence of racial animus motivating Officer Mercer's actions, stated U.S. Attorney Ariel Washington at a press conference announcing federal charges. This transforms his misconduct from simple abuse of power to criminal civil rights violations, carrying significant federal penalties. On September 2, 2025, just 21 days after the traffic stop, Daniel Mercer was indicted by a federal grand jury on multiple charges. Deprivation of rights under color of law, 18 U.S.C. Section 242. Falsification of records in a federal investigation, 18 U.S.C. Section 1519. Obstruction of justice, 18 U.S.C. Section 1503. Hate crime acts, 18 U.S.C. Section 249. Each of these charges carries a maximum sentence of 10 to 20 years in federal prison, explained former federal prosecutor James Martinez in a television interview. Given the evidence in this case, particularly the journal showing premeditation and racial motivation, Mercer is facing the very real possibility of spending decades behind bars. The consequences extended far beyond the criminal charges. Within weeks of the incident, Mercer's personal and professional life collapsed entirely. His wife, who had been in the process of divorcing him, filed for an emergency restraining order after the contents of his journal became public, citing previously unreported domestic abuse. "I was afraid to come forward before," Stephanie Mercer stated in her petition to the court. "Daniel always said no one would believe me because he was a police officer. Now that everyone knows who he really is, I can finally tell the truth." The police union, initially supportive of Mercer, withdrew all assistance after reviewing the evidence. The actions documented in this case go far beyond any reasonable use of discretion, stated Union President Michael Reynolds. Officer Mercer's conduct violates everything our badge stands for, and we cannot in good conscience provide representation in this matter. Mercer's pension, which would have been worth approximately $1.2 million over his lifetime, was forfeited under state law provisions regarding criminal misconduct by public employees. The pension forfeiture alone represents a devastating financial consequence, noted employment attorney Sarah Johnson. Even if Mercer somehow avoided prison time, which seems unlikely given the evidence, he has lost his entire retirement security. The ripple effects extended throughout the Lakeside Police Department. Chief Raymond Wilson announced his early retirement, acknowledging systemic failures in supervision and accountability. While I did not personally engage in or condone Officer Mercer's actions, the failure to identify and address his pattern of misconduct occurred under my leadership, Chief Wilson stated in his resignation letter on September 15, 2025. Accountability must start at the top. 3 additional supervisors who had failed to properly investigate previous complaints against Mercer were demoted or disciplined. The department's Internal Affairs Division underwent a complete restructuring, with new protocols implemented for tracking officer conduct. We're instituting an early warning system that flags potentially problematic behavior before it escalates to misconduct, announced Interim Chief Julia Reyes. No pattern like Officer Mercer's will ever go undetected in this department again. For Elijah Brandon, the aftermath brought both vindication and a new purpose. As his civil lawsuit progressed, he became an even more prominent voice for police accountability. "What happened to me was terrible," Brandon stated in his testimony before the City Council on September 28, 2025. But what's truly horrifying is thinking about all the people Officer Mercer victimized who didn't have the connections or knowledge that I did. How many lives did he ruin before he picked the wrong person to target? The city's review of Mercer's previous arrests revealed a disturbing pattern. Of the 64 drug arrests he had made in the previous 3 years, forensic re-examination found questionable evidence in 41 cases. The district attorney's office began the process of vacating these convictions. "We have an obligation to correct these injustices," stated District Attorney Thomas Rodriguez. These weren't just procedural errors. These were deliberate framings of innocent people by a rogue officer. James Bradley, who had lost his job as a hospital technician after being falsely arrested by Mercer the previous year, was one of the first to have his conviction overturned. "That arrest destroyed my life," Johnson testified during Mercer's preliminary hearing in October 2025. "I lost my job, my apartment, and my reputation, all because this officer decided to plant drugs on me during a routine traffic stop." The financial consequences for the city of Lakeside continued to mount. In addition to Brandon's $3.2 million lawsuit, which the city ultimately settled rather than risk an even larger jury verdict, each wrongful conviction carried potential damages. The total liability from Officer Mercer's misconduct is projected to exceed $15 million, stated a confidential memo from the city's risk management department that was later made public through records requests. This will necessitate budget cuts across multiple departments and potentially a tax increase to cover the settlements. As Mercer's criminal case progressed through the federal court system, he found himself increasingly isolated. Former colleagues avoided him, his legal bills mounted, and the evidence against him grew more damning with each pretrial hearing. In cases like this, we often see defendants seek plea agreements, explained legal analyst Maria Gonzalez. The evidence against Mercer is so overwhelming that going to trial would likely result in the maximum possible sentence. On November 17, 2025, 3 months after the traffic stop that ended his career, Daniel Mercer appeared in federal court to enter a plea. The once confident officer now appeared haggard and defeated, the consequences of his actions visibly weighing on him. "How do you plead to the charges in the indictment?" asked U.S. District Judge Robert Thompson. "Guilty, Your Honor," Mercer responded, his voice barely audible in the courtroom. As part of his plea agreement, Mercer admitted to systematically targeting black drivers, planting evidence in at least 12 specific cases, and maintaining his journal as a record of his illegal activities. "The defendant's admission of guilt confirms what the evidence has shown," stated U.S. Attorney Washington after the hearing. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment, but a years-long campaign of racially motivated abuse of power. Under federal sentencing guidelines, Mercer faced 12 to 15 years in prison. His sentencing hearing was scheduled for January 7, 2026. Meanwhile, the reforms triggered by the case extended beyond Lakeside. State legislators introduced the Brandon Act, requiring all police departments to implement early warning systems to identify problematic officer behavior before it escalates to misconduct. This case demonstrates how a single officer's unchecked misconduct can devastate lives and undermine public trust, stated State Senator Maria Rodriguez, the bill's sponsor. The Brandon Act will ensure that patterns of bias and abuse are identified and addressed before they lead to tragedy. For the victims of Mercer's previous misconduct, the process of rebuilding their lives began. The city established a compensation fund for those wrongfully convicted based on fabricated evidence, offering financial support and assistance with expunging criminal records. "No amount of money can give me back the year I lost," said James Bradley at a press conference announcing the fund in December 2025. "But at least now I can start over without the shadow of a criminal record hanging over me." As January approached and Mercer's sentencing date drew near, the final question remained: how severe would the consequences be for an officer who had so thoroughly betrayed his oath? Do you believe the criminal justice system adequately punishes police officers who abuse their power? Or do you think they often receive lighter sentences than civilians who commit similar crimes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The impact of the case extended far beyond Mercer himself. Police departments across the country began reviewing their own supervision and accountability systems, fearful of similar scandals in their jurisdictions. The Mercer case has become a watershed moment in police accountability, noted criminal justice professor Dr. James Wilson. Departments everywhere are asking themselves, do we have a Daniel Mercer on our force? And would we know it before it's too late? For Elijah Brandon, the approaching sentencing hearing represented the final chapter in an ordeal that had transformed him from community volunteer to national advocate for police reform. I never wanted to be the face of this issue, Brandon said in an interview in late December 2025. But now that I am, I intend to use this platform to ensure that what happened to me never happens to anyone else. As the consequences continue to cascade through the criminal justice system, one thing became abundantly clear. A single night of misconduct had triggered a reckoning that would reshape policing in Lakeside and beyond for years to come. On January 7, 2026, the United States District Court for the Eastern District was filled to capacity. Journalists, community members, police reform advocates, and law enforcement officials packed the gallery as former Officer Daniel Mercer, now dressed in a standard suit rather than his once proud uniform, stood before Judge Robert Thompson for sentencing. The courtroom fell silent as Elijah Brandon approached the podium to deliver his victim impact statement. Your Honor, 5 months ago, I was driving home from volunteering with at-risk youth when Officer Mercer decided to target me. Brandon began, his voice steady. In the months since, I've asked myself repeatedly, why me? What made him pull me over that night? The answer, revealed through his own writings and actions, was simply the color of my skin. Brandon continued, I'm standing here today, but many of Officer Mercer's victims never got this opportunity. They lost jobs, housing, custody of their children, all because one man with a badge decided their lives didn't matter. I'm not asking for vengeance, Your Honor. I'm asking for justice. Not just for me, but for every person whose life was destroyed by this officer's actions. The courtroom remained silent as James Bradley and 5 other previously unknown victims of Mercer's misconduct each took their turn at the podium, describing how false arrests had devastated their lives. When it was Mercer's turn to speak, the former officer appeared diminished, his shoulders hunched, his voice barely audible as he addressed the court. I can't undo what I've done, Mercer said. I betrayed my oath, my department, and the community I was sworn to protect. I let my personal biases and frustrations guide my actions, and innocent people suffered because of it. I accept responsibility for my actions and the punishment this court deems appropriate. Judge Thompson's expression remained impassive throughout these statements. When all parties had finished speaking, he delivered his decision. Mr. Mercer, you held a position of extraordinary power and trust, Judge Thompson began. With your badge came the authority to detain, arrest, and significantly impact the lives of your fellow citizens. This power was granted with the expectation that you would exercise it fairly, justly, and in accordance with the law. The judge continued. Instead, as evidenced by your own journal entries and actions captured on multiple cameras, you weaponized this authority against members of our community based solely on their race. You deliberately fabricated evidence to justify false arrests. You maintained detailed records of your misconduct, showing not a momentary lapse in judgment, but a calculated, years-long campaign of civil rights violations. The courtroom remained silent as Judge Thompson delivered the sentence. 14 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole, followed by 5 years of supervised release, and a prohibition from ever serving in law enforcement or security roles again. This sentence reflects the extraordinary breach of public trust your actions represent, Judge Thompson concluded. It also sends a clear message that those entrusted with enforcing our laws are not above them. As Mercer was led away in handcuffs, the full weight of his fall from grace was evident. The once respected officer with 14 years of service and multiple commendations would now spend the next 14 years, a year for each year he wore the badge, in federal prison. Outside the courthouse, U.S. Attorney Ariel Washington addressed the assembled media. Today's sentence brings this case full circle, Washington stated. Officer Mercer's career ended in a single night when he chose to abuse his power against Mr. Brandon. But the investigation revealed that night was merely the culmination of years of unchecked misconduct. The message should be clear to all who wear the badge. You are entrusted with extraordinary power, and with that comes extraordinary responsibility. Abuse that trust, and you will face the full force of federal prosecution. For the Lakeside Police Department, The resolution of Mercer's criminal case marked not an ending, but a beginning. Under the leadership of newly appointed Chief Julia Reyes, the department implemented sweeping reforms. Body cameras were now required to upload footage automatically at the end of each shift, with no officer ability to delete or alter recordings. A civilian oversight board with real disciplinary authority was established. An early warning system flagged officers who showed statistical disparities in their enforcement patterns. Psychological evaluations became mandatory for all officers annually, not just at hiring. A zero-tolerance policy for falsifying evidence was implemented, with immediate termination and criminal referral for violations. The Mercer case forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about our department. Chief Reyes acknowledged in her first press conference on January 10, 2026. We failed to identify a pattern of misconduct that should have been obvious. We failed to properly investigate civilian complaints. Most importantly, we failed the community we serve, particularly our black residents who were disproportionately targeted by Officer Mercer. The city of Lakeside's financial reckoning was immediate and severe. By mid-January 2026, the total cost of settlements related to his misconduct had reached $17.4 million, nearly 15% of the city's annual budget. These financial consequences will impact city services for years to come, admitted Mayor Robert Shun. But they pale in comparison to the human cost of allowing an officer like Mercer to operate unchecked for so long. We cannot put a price tag on justice. For Elijah Brandon, the resolution brought both closure and a new beginning. Using a portion of his $3.2 million settlement, he established the Justice Accountability Project, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting victims of police misconduct and advocating for systemic reforms. What happened to me that night was terrible, Brandon reflected in an interview shortly after the sentencing. But what's truly unforgivable is that it happened to so many others before me. People who didn't have the resources or platform to fight back. My goal now is to be their voice and ensure this never happens again. The Brandon Act, inspired by the case, was already being drafted by state legislators, with plans to mandate early intervention systems in all law enforcement agencies statewide. Similar legislation was under consideration in several other states. James Bradley, whose wrongful conviction was among the first to be overturned, found a new purpose as well. After receiving compensation from a city, he enrolled in law school with plans to become a civil rights attorney. Officer Mercer took a year of my life, Johnson said at the first fundraiser for the Justice Accountability Project on January 15, 2026. But he also gave me a mission. I want to make sure that what happened to me and so many others never happens again. For Daniel Mercer, the consequences extended beyond his prison sentence. His ex-wife was granted full custody of their children, with Mercer permitted only supervised visitation after his release. His pension was permanently forfeited, and civil judgments against him personally, separate from the city's liability, ensured that any future income would go toward compensating his victims. Mercer's case represents one of the most complete falls from grace I've seen in my career, noted legal analyst James Martinez. He lost his freedom, his career, his family, his reputation, and his financial security, all because he chose to abuse the power entrusted to him. The ripple effects extended throughout the criminal justice system. The review of Mercer's previous arrests ultimately led to 47 convictions being vacated, with the district attorney's office acknowledging that the true number of false arrests might never be known. Some of Officer Mercer's victims have moved away, some have served their sentences and rebuilt their lives, and some may never come forward, District Attorney Rodriguez acknowledged. The damage done to public trust may take generations to repair. Plans were already underway for a memorial outside the Lakeside Police Department headquarters, not celebrating Mercer, but commemorating the victims of his misconduct and the reforms his actions ultimately triggered. The proposed plaque would read, "In recognition of those whose lives were unjustly impacted by abuse of power, and as a permanent reminder that justice requires eternal vigilance." For the residents of Lakeside, particularly its black community, the resolution brought mixed emotions. While Mercer's punishment was severe by the standards of police misconduct cases, the fact that his behavior continued unchecked for years left lingering questions about systemic failures. One officer has been held accountable, and that's important, said community activist Tamika Williams. But the system that failed to stop him for years remains largely intact. Real justice requires not just punishing bad actors, but transforming the institutions that enable them. As for Officer Daniel Mercer, Federal Bureau of Prisons records now listed him as inmate hashtag 45872-019, serving his sentence at a medium security facility in Colorado, far from the community he once patrolled and the power he so grievously abused. His case was already being incorporated into police academy training nationwide as a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that a badge is not a shield from accountability, but a symbol of the highest standards of conduct and integrity. The final question remains for all of us. How do we ensure that power is exercised responsibly? What systems must we build to protect against those who would abuse their authority? And how do we balance the necessary authority of law enforcement with equally necessary accountability? If you've experienced or witnessed police misconduct, resources are available to help. Organizations like the Justice Accountability Project provide support for victims and guidance on documenting and reporting abuse of power. Remember, a single night's decision ended Officer Mercer's career, but the consequences of his actions, both the harm done to his victims and the reforms triggered by his case, will continue for generations to come. This story reminds us that true justice isn't merely punishing wrongdoing after it occurs, but creating systems that prevent abuse before it happens. And that responsibility belongs to all of us.
Guilty.
The court accepts the plea and will continue with sentencing.